declare a recess at any time. Today we welcome everyone here for this hearing entitled Artificial Intelligence and Intellectual Property, Part 2. That's because Part 1 was Nashville, and Nashville is not the only center of great intellectual property creation. I think Mr. Schiff and I, as Californians and some others, would certainly be the first to say that. I now recognize myself for an official opening statement. This subcommittee has been at the forefront of intellectual property protection for decades. In fact, we are entrusted with that protection by the Constitution, and as one of the oldest committees of the Congress, we take that seriously. For all of those who have been involved in AI, they recognize it isn't new, and the problems of AI are not new. But just as Moore's law created an acceleration of processing power and speed, regenerative AI is doing that before our very eyes today. So today we will be focusing on what has been with us for a long time, problems that have been created, unsolved and untreated, that must be treated sooner rather than later. We also will recognize that there is already a disparity in laws between states. Some of those laws are models for the federal government to adapt. Others may in fact be ones in which the federal government needs to intervene to create a stable and productive platform for copyright. Copyright and trademark do not exist as rights, even though we call them intellectual property rights. They are inducements. They are a balancing act. And I always remind people that that balancing act and that inducement must from time to time be checked to find, are we in fact rewarding the creators of intellectual property sufficiently? Are we protecting the rights that come from that inducement in a way in which one creator does not find themselves at a disadvantage to another creator? Many people view themselves as creators of intellectual property. More than 20 years ago, before another committee of Congress, a former congressman came in and proudly showed us a CD that he had created and given more than 100 as Christmas presents for. It was, in fact, the works of half a dozen different artists in a unique way. And he said, this doesn't exist anywhere else. I created this. There was not one new song. They simply were put onto a CD in a very interesting way. There wasn't even a voiceover from the congressman. I sat in that committee hearing before Energy and Commerce, and in fact, saw heads nodding, saying, well, yes, you created something. He no more created something than, in fact, if the perfect likeness of any performing artist were simply taken and used again. That's not to say that a cover band doesn't have the ability to perform with the attempt to entertain, but it does mean that AI has an unlimited ability to duplicate, and we today will in fact be dealing with that question. A vivid example are deep fakes. Deepfakes are clearly abuses of AI that raise the question of whether AI technology can be used to spread misinformation. That's not a question any longer. It's been answered. The question is, will we protect celebrities from deepfakes? Will we, in fact, protect politicians from appearing to say something even worse than what we say in real life? I knew that would be a crowd pleaser. Fundamentally, what AI does is it does perfectly, or can do perfectly, that which we have mimicked for generations. Most great lasting pieces of music are in fact passed down from generation to generation, and before they were passed down in writing, they were passed down by performers in front of each other, teaching the next generation how to do something. So there's nothing wrong with that continuity, but the continuity that's created that's created by man has already been legislated in a way to protect for 70 years past the life of that creator. That is not the case today under AI. It is critical that the development of the technology be ethical and not harmful. Ethical and not harmful is a standard that we believe can be achieved, but it's going to have to also be uniform within the United States, and the United States must lead the world in that ethical and not harmful. Not only is it important for the economy, but it's important for American technology leadership. It's not just about the copyright holders of today and those who will generate new copyright with the assistance of AI. It's about whether America will lead the world into a greater efficiency using AI and, quite frankly, more things that please, that amuse, that in fact do what entertainers, artists, writers have done for thousands of years. This also includes a respect for the freedom that we enjoy in our system. Our very Constitution was, in fact, a plagiarism of great ideas of the past, but it was put together in an original way that has sustained us for 200 years. There will be other hearings. Other hearings that, in fact, will deal with the impact to patents and others. There will be others that will deal directly with trademarks. There will be others that deal with other parts of intellectual property. But today, I think we're going to focus on our witnesses and what they can show us has happened to them in real life and what we can do about it. And with that, I just want to take a moment and give us all a reflection on one of my favorite artists of the past. And so could we present my friend and a man I actually saw in concert.
Hello, I'm not Johnny Cash. I'm a Barbie girl in a Barbie world. Life in plastic, it's fantastic. You can brush my hair, undress me everywhere. Oh, come on, Barbie, let's go party, 'cause I'm in a Barbie world.
I'm sure you'll all see that again in days to come. Our challenge is to make sure that if somebody wants to make something that the late Johnny Cash didn't make and couldn't make because it wasn't even available, if you will, with the new Barbie movie, that his estate for that likeness be properly compensated. That will be one of the questions for today. And with that, I recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this important hearing today. Thank you for that visual demonstration of why it's important that we're here today.
You can pick your star when you've got the gavel, too, my friend.
Well, you've set the template, so I like it. And I thank you for hosting the subcommittee out here in Los Angeles, taking our show on the road. This is the mecca of artistry and creativity, culture, as well as economic vitality. And also, this hearing could not come at a better time on a weekend where the music industry is set to celebrate the best and the brightest, the up-and-comers and the living legends. We are here to examine how current laws and future legislation can protect creators from misuse of a technology that is poised to transform the world as we know it. Drake and The Weeknd didn't collaborate to produce Heart on My Sleeve, and President Biden didn't record a robocall telling the New Hampshire Democrats not to vote in their primary, and Tom Hanks did not appear in a video endorsing a dental plan. They didn't have to. Using generative artificial intelligence or generative AI, a layperson can manipulate an individual's image, likeness, or voice to produce novel content without the subject's knowledge or consent. Altering voices and manipulating images is nothing new, but creating new material indistinguishable from reality is. Because of these technological advancements, 2024 will be the first AI presidential election where deepfakes and misinformation will have the power to deceive voters, making an abnormally consequential election even more consequential and controversial. Abuse of women through the creation of explicit images with generative AI is already a problem, and if you don't believe me, ask Taylor Swift about that. And consumer fraud and other criminality accomplished through the replication of loved ones' voices is no longer an esoteric law school hypothetical. Beyond the parade of horribles, generative AI poses unique challenges to the creative industries in which AI has the potential to create an even larger gap between the haves and the have-nots. Aspiring singers, songwriters, and musicians move to cities like Atlanta, where I'm from, every day in the hopes of breaking into the music industry. These individuals, including many who become my constituents, often work multiple jobs while they pursue their dream of being able to make a living wage based on their creative talents alone. Between COVID shutdowns of concert venues and increased cost of living, artists in my district already feel their dream is even farther out of reach. Misuse of generative AI technologies could compound that problem. For example, copyright laws protect an aspiring singer from having her work performed without compensation, but that copyright does not necessarily extend to the sound of her voice. AI can create an original background track in her voice simply by ingesting previous recordings without her knowledge, without her consent, and certainly without compensation. Our question today is not if, but how Congress should act to protect artists from such treatment. It is our responsibility as legislators to ensure that the creators who enrich our society with their talent and work are able to live and thrive in the age of AI. Many states protect our right of publicity, but no such right exists at the federal level. I'm looking forward to hearing from our witnesses how they believe the current system is working and what protections coming out of Congress should look like. Finally, I recognize that change is not something we can ignore. We cannot legislate a perpetual here and now into existence, and we should not want to. In addition to the profound medical, business, and therapeutic advancements offered by AI, the creative industries themselves have already benefited from the incorporation of AI into their artistry and business models. Indeed, that same aspiring singer can experiment and create new works without the resource-intensive equipment and studio time needed just a few years ago. I thank the chairman again for holding this important hearing. I thank the witnesses for their time. I thank you all for attending this consequential hearing, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Seeing no other opening statements by chairman or ranking member, without objection, all opening statements will be included in the record. It's now my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panel of witnesses. First, Ms. Wilson is a singer, songwriter, and actor who show I watch regularly. She is the reigning Country Music Association Entertainer of the Year and Female Vocalist of the Year, as well as Academy of Country Music Female Artist of the Year. This Sunday, Ms. Wilson will be in the running for not one, but 2 additional Grammy Awards, including Best Country Music Album. In addition to her successful music career, Ms. Wilson has appeared most recently on seasons of the hit show, again mentioned, Yellowstone, which, quite frankly, is in the tradition. Maybe I'll stay off of that. Thank you for being here. Next, we have Mr. Harvey Mason. Jr. Mr. Mason is President and CEO of the Recording Academy, the world's leading society of music professionals, which is best known for putting on the Grammy Awards themselves. Mr. Mason is also a prolific music producer, songwriter, working in numerous artists, including the late Whitney Houston. In addition, he has also appeared and been a mentor and producer of American Idol, The X Factor. Additionally, Mr. Mason is accomplished composer, music director, and director of films, TV, including hits like Sing and the Pitch Perfect movies. Boy, are we lucky to get you here. Next, we have Mr. Christopher Moore. Mr. Moore is president of the Software Information Industry Association, which has a very diversified membership of over 400 companies. Members encompass the very companies who are at the forefront of developing, applying, and innovating AI technology, including the creative industries. His prior role, Mr. Moore served as the industry's senior vice president for intellectual property, and for decades has been an experienced IP professor and professional. Next, we have Professor Jennifer Rothman. Professor Rothman is at the University of Pennsylvania Law School, also holds a faculty appointment at the Annenberg School of Communication. She is I don't talk for a living. She is internationally recognized as an expert in intellectual property, law, rights, and publicity, the right of privacy, and the intersection of such rights, which include constitutional protection of those rights, freedom of speech. Professor Rothman is also an elected member of the American Law Institute. In addition to her JD from the UCLA, Professor Rothman also holds a Master of Fine Arts degree in film production from the University of Southern California, the competitor to UCLA. That's quite a bookend. School of Cinematography. We welcome all of our witnesses, and we're going to begin by doing the mundane but cool thing for the photograph of asking you to rise and take the oath. And if you'd raise your right hand, because it's really good for the picture. Do you solemnly swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that the testimony you're about to give will be true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Please be seated. Let the record reflect that all witnesses did answer in the affirmative, and we will now begin with an amazing producer of the intellectual property and a victim of AI, Ms. Wilson.
Thank you so much. Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the subcommittee, thank you so much for inviting me here today to share my thoughts. I am Lainey Wilson. I am a recording artist, a songwriter, and entertainer. I use my music and my voice to tell stories, to connect to my fans, and to help them to connect to each other. My art is uniquely and literally me, my name, my likeness, my voice. I do not have to tell you how much of a gut punch it is to have your name, your likeness, or your voice ripped from you and used in ways that you could never imagine or would never allow. It is wrong, plain and simple. There aren't many things that we can control in life, but making decisions about the use of our own selves, our own unique qualities, that should be one. I am excited about a lot of ways that artificial intelligence can be used to help people, but I'm nervous about how it can be used to take personal rights. And I'm honored today to represent the Human Artistry Campaign, a coalition of creators and organizations that promote the ethical use of AI, and who understand that human connection is an essential part of our culture that we just cannot put at risk. Many creators have already seen their life's work and their own voices and images thoughtlessly ingested into AI models without their permission. Our identities represent years of work to hone our craft and make a livelihood out of our passion. Our voices and likenesses are indelible parts of us that have enabled us to showcase our talents and grow our audiences, not mere digital kibble for a machine to duplicate without consent. AI tools are purposefully being made to take a lifetime of specific artists' voices and likenesses in a split second. Some creators are okay with AI platforms using their voices and likenesses, and some are not. The important thing is that it should be their choice, and not a choice that an AI cloning company gets to make for them. AI-generated music and video using an artist's unique identity to perform in questionable settings or to sing lyrics that they would never write or express, that does not truly reflect who they are, is unacceptable. It is a personal violation that threatens a person's dignity and can put at risk everything that they have worked so hard to accomplish. An artist's voice and likeness are their property and should not take a backseat to the economic interests of companies that have not invested in or partnered with the artist. I join with many other creators in the Human Artistry Campaign in support of the No AI Fraud Act, and I want to express my deep appreciation to its sponsors. I have heard that some interests have criticized it as preventing freedom of expression that uses the voices and images of other people. I'm a big proponent of free speech, and I'm certainly no lawyer, but I do know that if you take away the ability of artists to express themselves, you are, by definition, limiting freedom of expression. It's not just artists who need protecting. The fans need it too. It's needed for high school girls who have experienced life-altering deep fake porn using their faces, for elderly citizens convinced to hand over their life savings by a vocal clone of their grandchild in trouble. AI increasingly affects every single one of us. And I'm so grateful that you are considering taking action to ensure that these tools are used in a responsible way. I want to thank y'all for your role as guardians of our personal rights. We need artists to keep telling stories and connecting with fans and bringing people together authentically. And we need to keep humanity in art. We cannot lose that. The No AI Fraud Act is a great place to start. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mason.
Thank you. Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify today on the topic of artificial intelligence. My name is Harvey Mason, Jr. As the CEO of the Recording Academy, I'm happy to welcome you to Los Angeles for Grammy Week, music's biggest week. The Academy celebrates music every year at the Grammy Awards, but we also support music through the year as a membership organization representing thousands of music creators and music professionals. As Chairman Issa said, I too am a music creator. As a songwriter, a producer, I've worked with legends and superstars from Whitney Houston to Beyonce to Elton John to Justin Bieber. Music makers have always embraced technology to innovate, from multi-track recording and the electric guitar to drum machines and synthesizers. There are so many examples of disruptive but really cool technologies that changed how music is made. AI is the latest example of a tool that can expand opportunities for different voices to follow their passion and create new music, and we believe that's a good thing. AI also has many valuable uses outside of the creative process, including those that amplify fan connections, automate efficient payment systems, and more. We embrace these advances, and the Recording Academy is leading by example. This year, the Academy announced a new partnership with IBM that will use generative AI to create customized content before and during the 66th Grammy Awards this weekend. The content will be reviewed, adjusted, and supplemented by the Academy's editorial team. Through this partnership, we'll be able to feature more insights on Grammy-nominated artists, drive engagement around special moments, and connect millions of music fans to the artists that they love. Importantly, AI will be a tool that our editorial team will use to enhance and expand their work, not replace it. And our team will be involved in everything that is produced. In addition, the AI will be drawing from our own content and our own data with our permission and our oversight. The Recording Academy is in the business of celebrating human excellence and human creativity. That was the biggest concern when we crafted our Grammy Awards policies. We understand that AI is here and it's not going anywhere, but our award guidelines stay true to our mission to honor the people behind the music. Only human creators are eligible to win a Grammy Award. So as we embrace the huge potential of AI, we're also mindful of the risks. And more than any other issue involving AI, the artists and creators I talk to are concerned that there's very little protection for artists who see their own name or likeness or voice used to create AI-generated materials. Artists in every genre have seen their voices mimicked using AI without their permission. Iconic artists who are no longer with us have also had their voices reproduced without the involvement of their families, like you heard today. This misuse hurts artists and their fans alike. Recently, we saw the extreme dark side of AI fakes, as some of the most famous and recognizable artists in the world have been the target of explicit AI-generated images put online. And AI fakes don't just target artists, they impact all of you as well. Before New Hampshire's presidential primary, a robocall impersonating the president discouraged people from voting. While it's not clear if this fake was actually AI, the potential for AI to be used to spread misinformation is obvious and is terrifying. Many issues involving AI are complex, and the path forward is uncertain. But the problem of AI fakes is clear to everyone. Right now, there's a patchwork of state laws that addresses the right of publicity for individuals. These laws are inconsistent with each other, and they're out of date, and they do not address the AI problem. Many states don't even have them at all. This is a problem that only Congress can address to protect all Americans. For this reason, the Academy is grateful for the introduction of the No AI Fraud Act, supported by many members of this committee. The bill establishes in federal law that an individual has a personal property right in the use of their image and voice. That's just common sense, and it's long overdue. The bill also empowers individuals to enforce this right against those who facilitate, create, and spread AI frauds without permission. Importantly, the bill balances these new protections with the First Amendment to safeguard speech and innovation. Freedom of expression is essential to the music we create, but it also must include the ability to protect our own individual expression from being misappropriated by others. Last year, the Recording Academy joined other organizations representing all the creative industries to launch the Global Human Artistry Campaign. Today, the campaign includes over 170 organizations in 30 countries. And this morning, the campaign published in an ad in the USA Today featuring the names of hundreds of artists and actors asking Congress to support the No AI Fraud Act. On behalf of the Academy and our over 20,000 members, I too respectfully but strongly ask for your support. Technology has and always will play a part in amplifying creativity, but human creativity is the ultimate expression of creativity. Creative works shape our identity, our values, our worldview. People relate most deeply to works that embody the lived experience, perceptions, and attitudes of others. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Moore.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the committee, it's a privilege to appear in front of you today. My name is Chris Moore, and I am the president of the Software and Information Industry Association, or SIIA. Thank you for this opportunity to share our views on identity in the age of AI. SIIA represents over 350 diverse companies in the business of information. Our members range from startup firms to some of the largest and most recognizable corporations in the world. For over 40 years, we've advocated for the health of the information lifecycle, advancing favorable conditions for its creation, dissemination, and productive use. Our members create educational software and content, e-commerce platforms, legal research and financial databases, and a variety of other products that people depend on in wide swaths of their commercial and everyday lives. We are the place where information and technology meet. and sometimes collide. Our members have wholeheartedly embraced the promise of AI to revolutionize information management, creation, analysis, and dissemination. Collectively, they've invested billions in its development, acquisition, and deployment, and are pioneering the use of AI to address myriad social needs in the classroom, in fraud detection, in market data, in money laundering investigations, and in locating missing children. When it comes to policy, SIIA generally advocates for policy solutions that withstand changes in technology. We acknowledge, however, that in some cases, AI is different, and support the adoption of a risk-based framework to regulate this technology. Our members have been leaders in advancing AI accountability and governance. The reason is simple. AI that generates the most unbiased, accurate, and trustworthy information will be based on reliable data. Respect for and protection of intellectual property is key to our policy mission, and our members rely on the incentives that IP law creates. We've been involved in anti-piracy work for almost 4 decades. We're members of the Copyright Alliance. We believe that the use of AI must comply with existing statutory requirements and respect for established intellectual property rights, which provide crucial incentives to authors, artists, technologists, and scientists to create original works. The use of copyrighted works without permission to train generative artificial intelligence models remains the subject of active litigation, and the legality of its use will be heavily fact-dependent. Our members are confident that the courts will sort out the fair uses from the unfair, and that at this point in time, they are the institution best situated to do so with respect to the copyright law. With that said, we recognize that this is not a copyright hearing, and we recognize the non-copyright harms that misuse and abuse of AI can cause. We're seeing examples in the media of digital replicas used to fool the public or maliciously target an individual. When abused, this technology can cause severe harm to a person's privacy rights, and we commend the committee for examining potential legal remedies. I want to highlight 3 points. First, not all identity-based harms are the same. Many identity-based harms are already covered by different doctrines created by federal and state statutes, and these doctrines already apply to generative AI uses. For example, the law already remedies false celebrity endorsement under the Lanham Act. Second, it's important to consider the limits of the First Amendment. Statutory rights that regulate identity will be reviewed by the courts as a form of speech regulation. In order to survive the heightened scrutiny that such a statute would receive, it's critical that it both be tailored to remedy a specific harm and contain sufficient breathing space for expressive works and other kinds of protected speech. And third, we recognize the harm that generative AI can create for individuals, most notably through the use of sexually explicit deepfakes. The ability to quickly create sexually explicit deepfakes is new. Congress did pass a statute to address this problem as part of the Violence Against Women Act as applied to revenge porn, but its application to deepfakes is at best ambiguous. This is an area where Congress can and should act. Thank you for the opportunity to present our views, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Professor Rothman.
Chairman Issa, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today about artificial intelligence and identity rights. I'm Jennifer Rothman. I am a professor of law at the University of Pennsylvania and have been researching and writing about identity rights and intellectual property for almost 2 decades. You asked me to consider the possibility of a federal right of publicity as well as 2 circulated draft bills. I will focus on 2 primary points taken from my more detailed written statement. First, that although the capabilities of AI are new, the problem of using a person's voice, likeness, or performances without permission is long-standing. We have many laws already on the books that address such unauthorized uses regardless of the technology employed to do so. Accordingly, any federal legislation in this area must improve the current state of affairs and not create or exacerbate problems. Second, any federal right to a person's voice or likeness must not be transferable away from that person. Allowing such transfers violates our most sacred and fundamental rights and thwarts the express goals of legislation addressing AI, many of which have been articulated today, which are to protect the livelihood of performers, the dignity of ordinary people, and the ability to distinguish accurate images and sounds from those which are deceptive. My first point is that current laws already apply to works created by artificial intelligence. From the early 1900s to today, every state that has considered the issue has adopted some form of a right of publicity. None have rejected it. This is a law that restricts others from using another person's identity without permission, including in the context of performances. The concerning examples of AI that have been raised in these and prior hearings all violate these existing laws. Tom Hanks, Drake, The Weeknd, and the various teenagers, such as those in New Jersey, whose images have been used in pornographic images, each have likely successful lawsuits under state publicity laws. Federal copyright law may also be violated in these contexts, and Hanks, Drake, and The Weeknd could bring successful federal false endorsement and trademark claims. In short, there are already robust protections on the books. This means that the bar to enacting something new should be high, and legislation should not destabilize what is working about current laws with hundreds of years of precedents, nor make things worse for performers, athletes, or ordinary people. This leads me to my second point. Any federal intervention in this space must protect self-ownership and ongoing control of one's own identity. No one should own another person. Unfortunately, each of the circulated drafts to address the problems of AI and performance rights essentially do exactly this, including the No AI Fraud Act. They allow another person, or most likely a company, to own or control another person's voice or likeness forever and in any context. It's essential that any right created by federal legislation that protects a person's identity not be transferable away from that person. Imagine a world in which Taylor Swift's first record label obtained rights in perpetuity to young Swift's voice and likeness. The label could then replicate Swift's voice over and over in new songs that she never wrote, and have AI renditions of her perform and endorse the songs in videos, and even have holograms perform them on tour. In fact, under the proposed No AI Fraud Act, the label would be able to sue Swift herself for violating her own right of publicity if she used her voice and likeness to write and record new songs and publicly perform them. This is the topsy-turvy world that the two draft bills would create. This does not serve the interests of current and future recording artists, nor the public more broadly. Allowing another person or entity to own a living human being's likeness or voice in perpetuity violates our fundamental and constitutional right to liberty. We do not allow people to sell themselves into slavery or servitude. We do not allow people to sell their votes or their organs or their babies. And we should not allow people to sell their names, likenesses, or voices. Making publicity rights transferable poses a particular risk to student athletes, children, actors, recording artists, and models. Such transferability also threatens ordinary people who may unwittingly sign over those rights as part of online terms of service. Allowing transferability harms not only the person who loses control of their own identity, but all of us. Owners or licensees of another's identity rights could generate performances by that person forever, making them say and do things they never did. This is a chilling prospect and poses a broad threat to society by undermining trust in authentic communication and seeding misinformation. Accordingly, any federal rights to a person's identity must not be transferable, and there must be significant limits on licensing. Without such limits, these proposed laws will exacerbate rather than combat deception and will fail to protect each of our voices and likenesses. In spite of these concerns, there are some opportunities with federal law in this area, and I discuss these in more detail in my written submission. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. And you've made it perfect for me to recognize myself for a round of questioning. Professor, under existing law, that very slavery, the ability to sign away your rights, as far as you know, is there any prevention of Ms. Wilson from potentially signing away both her current and future rights, or any other artist under current law?
So under federal law, there's no right. Under federal law, there's no right that allows for that transferability. But I'm saying, is there any prohibition on her signing a document that would say that she's doing it? Well, the state laws, some of them preclude some transferability. For example, Illinois prohibits creditors from getting control over a person's identity if they go into bankruptcy.
Right.
In
Bankruptcy law does not allow you to lose your future earnings, is what you're saying, and that's federal too.
No, I think that one of the things that's really important for legislation in this area, federal legislation, is not to allow and erect a federal law that allows that transferability. I think that
I couldn't agree with you more, but I asked the question the way I did for a reason, and that, Ms. Wilson, I want to bring it to you. You're now an incredibly accomplished artist. You control your destiny, perhaps at the highest level of any artist because of who you are and where you are, but you earned that from the bottom.
For sure.
Tell us, were the pressures when you were first trying to get that break, were they such that, in fact, those who sign you would, in fact, have asked you to sign away a great many things, including what the professor indicated?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I've been in Nashville for 13 years, moved from Louisiana up there to go chase a crazy dream, and especially when you're just kind of diving into it head first, you're just trying to like figure things out. And you know, I'm not an expert when it comes to this at all, but I do know how this stuff has made me feel, and it's terrifying. And they are taking advantage of trustworthy people, and words are powerful to me.
Yeah. Mr. Mason, would you say that what Ms. Wilson has just said is one of the pressures that, in fact, consistent with what the professor rightfully so said, that Congress can and should not only not create something that allows essentially forward slavery of somebody's likeness being owned by somebody else, such that you could literally shut down an artist from their future work, but that in fact that is one of the challenges we have today, because the future of AI says that things can be created in the future, and those who own that right will be the one being able to create it.
Definitely a challenge and something that needs to be addressed. I will say in this particular bill there are certain safeguards, and there's language that says there has to be attorneys present and involved, but we also believe that families should have the freedom to enter into different business arrangements. But there needs to be a lot more discussion around that in partnership with the labels and other people that could be entering into those.
Well, I'm not going to dwell on it, but I think the professor hit the most important one, which is that the living artist should never be prevented from future work. Right. And we all know that recording contracts have sort of, at times, controlled future work and not allowed it. And so that is something that I'm concerned about. I'm going to touch quickly on one question because it's slightly outside this hearing, but it's important, I think, to get in the record. Ms. Wilson, currently the Copyright Office has said that AI per se is not copyrightable, that pure AI isn't. If today you lost that distinctive voice and yet you wanted to remix or create new works, but you wanted your voice to be heard, AI would allow you to sing though your voice be lost. Do you believe that Congress should look at the ability to copyright a work which is original but uses AI? And I say that not just for you, but for all those who, quite frankly, had a voice when they were young, and over the years, their range dissipated, and they would still like to produce the quality that made them famous.
Man.
I don't ask easy questions. I'm
no,
not
you
paid
don't.
for
But
that.
all I can do is speak from the heart, and that's really it. Because, like I said, when it comes to all this other stuff, I'm not an expert in it. But I do know that I've worked my entire life for this. I wrote my first song at 9 years old. I started playing guitar at 11. I moved to Nashville when I was 19. I've been there 13 years trying to do this. I take a lot of pride in my work ethic, and I have spent years and years and years in blood, sweat, and tears on to be where I am today. And Just having that thought in the back of my head of like at any point in time, people could put words into my mouth or people could take things away from me. And I've worked really hard on building this reputation. And in a split second, it could be gone. And I'm just, I want to just see a change because there's been so many things, even in the past few months, that I've seen online from me selling weight loss gummies. And, you know, I'm a big fan of, you know, I've got a lot of little kids watching me, a lot of little girls and a lot of little boys, and I want to encourage them to feel comfortable in their own skin and love themselves, and I would never in a million years ever do anything like that. But at the end of the day, you know, people say, like, I got to see it to believe it. Well, they're seeing it, and they're believing it, and folks that I'm super close to even believe it at times, too, and it's really, really scary when it gets to that point.
We look forward to finding a way to protect that. Professor, just briefly, because my time has expired, the answer to that question, currently, you can't. Is there a pathway that you see that we should produce to facilitate the ability of someone to augment their own voice, the living artist, or to use their own record of voice and use AI and still enjoy a copyright capability?
I think that it's difficult.
Turn your thing on.
It's difficult in a global sense to assess the specifics of whether that would obtain copyright. But
I can assure you that if we say it does, it does. Okay. That's the good news is the Copyright Office has made a decision and we make law. But we don't want to, as you said in your opening statement, we don't want to make law unless it is well thought out, practical, enforceable, and fair.
I think that if the AI is controlled by a human being and an artist, it's not very different from some of the pitch shifting and technology and mixing that already goes into making sort of first-rate recordings, and people even do it during live performances. So I don't think that would be prohibitive of receiving copyright protection.
Thank you. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mason, when the fake Drake song was released on streaming in April of 2023, the public quickly discovered that this wasn't the long sought-after collaboration between Drake and The Weeknd, but an entirely new AI-generated song. I understand that his studio was able to file a notice and takedown under the DMCA because a small portion of the song was copied from an earlier Drake song. If the song had not contained copyrighted material, would Drake and his representatives had that same recourse?
Currently, no, they would not have. It was taken down because there was a sample.
So what, if anything, do you believe this incident says about the need for legislation?
It's opened the door to what's possible. It's shown the power of AI when it comes to voice modeling, when it comes to potentially deceiving fans. What we believe is that artists, creators, people who make music and make art should have the ability to approve or have some oversight into how their voice and likeness is being used. There should be an accrediting process so that consumers can understand what it is they're listening to. I want to know, is that the real Drake? Is that not the real? And artists should also be remunerated properly when their voice or likeness is used. And for us, it really comes down to choice. If an artist would like to participate in creating music through AI or allow others to utilize their voice, we believe there should be a choice, and some will want to do that. As Lainey said, there'll be some that would rather not. But as long as they're credited properly, they have certain approval rights, and there's a way for them to be paid fairly, we see that as a possibility.
Thank you. Professor Rothman, you have testified that any federal right to a person's voice or license must not be transferable away from that person. In the context that was just described by Mr. Mason, how would that assertion line up with what he just said?
So First of all, I think there would be a claim under current law, including under current federal law, if someone circulated a song and claimed that Drake and The Weeknd recorded it, as they did. That violates the Lanham Act. They have trademarks in their names. It also violates federal false endorsement law. So they would have claims, and those are all exempted from Communications Decency Act Section 230. So it wouldn't even go through the DMCA takedown provision. So it would be quite straightforward in that regard.
I'm really wanting to know, though, about the transferability of a person's voice or likeness. Mr. Mason said that the artist should have a choice, and you're advocating for, I take it, a ban on a person being able to transfer their rights to their voice and their likeness.
That's correct. I don't think that should be allowed. And this doesn't mean that they can't make money from licensing their voice or likeness in limited contexts, but it means that we shouldn't allow people to transfer their voice and likeness and performances in perpetuity or even in very broad contexts, because this goes against all of the concerns we've talked about, which is deceptive performances where people can't tell whether it's real or not, and even the protections in the No AI Fraud Act that suggest that you need a lawyer. Well, if you take a young, aspiring artist, they may be able to get a lawyer, but they're going to have trouble paying for it. They're still going to have the same bargaining power, and it's not the sort of thing that we allow people to sell
young artists
forever.
Typically don't have good legal representation. I think first deal that gets signed, and that deal could include language that transfers to the recording company or the motion picture company, the right in perpetuity for your likeness and your voice, that kind of thing, just in that first contract. So I think there is some danger right there, and I think, how would legislation look that would prescribe the transfer of voice and likeness rights?
Thank you. I've thought a lot about this because I think that's exactly right. The initial recording contracts will likely include those provisions. The NCAA has tried to include those provisions for student athletes. So this is a real opportunity for federal legislation to make clear, even under state laws, that this is not permissible. Now, how would this, in terms, and it could be prohibited such that the only person who would have this right is the actual identity holder, the person themselves. Now, that doesn't mean that you couldn't draft something that provided, for example, to record labels standing to enforce the use of a person's voice or likeness in a specific recording that was AI generated during the terms of a recording contract with the record label. It's very common for people with exclusive licenses in a variety of intellectual property contexts to have standing to bring legal claims. So I don't think we need to allow wide transferability in order to protect those interests.
Thank you. My time has expired.
I'd have given you more time.
I'm trying not to take more time over than you did.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. We now recognize the gentleman from Florida, number 1, Mr. Gates.
Mr. Moore, does your Association of Technology Companies endorse the No AI Fraud Act?
We have no position on it. I don't know that I wouldn't characterize us as exclusively an association of technology companies.
Is your group supportive or not supportive of the No Fakes Act?
We have no position on it.
Do you intend to take a position on either of those bills?
We're examining it.
So there seem to be two key features of the No AI Fraud Act. One is the transferability, which we've been discussing. The other is the liability. So these technology platforms that share deep fakes, Mr. Mason, do you think they should be liable for the harm that causes the creator?
Definitely a complicated question. I think the liability lies across many layers. To me, it's people who utilize the technology inappropriately, it's people who distribute it, and it is also people who host it.
Well, right now, they have no liability for that.
understand
And
that.
you've endorsed the bill that would impose that liability. So you support that, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Moore, your association, how do you think about liability for the entities that do the harms Mr. Mason described?
I think there's at least two issues in there. One is the liability of the person who creates it. The offending
Mine's
work in
about the
first
publication. My question directly relates to the provisions of the bill that create liability if you disseminate and produce and publish these deep fakes.
So the problem that I think we would be looking at as we examine this is that when regulating in this space, it's very important to focus on the particular harm that Congress is looking to prevent. When we talk about rights of identity, there are, in general, what it does is it lumps together a bunch of different harms. There is the commercial
Mr. Moore,
harm.
I have very limited time. The
Okay.
question is, if someone disseminates deep fakes on their technology platform, is it your view that they should be liable or that they should not be liable for that?
I think the answer, for now, our position is the current law is adequate to address.
So the current law doesn't create that liability, Ms. Wilson. And so I hear about your concerns, and if these technology companies that disseminate this stuff do it, they believe the current law should exist and there should be no enhanced liability. I look at what happened to Taylor Swift. She is the most famous person in the world. And so to me, it seems as though she's just the first wave in the set. And that coming is a regime in which any prominent person could be subject to these deep fakes. And technology platforms can then generate revenue off of it and then don't want to be liable for that. Does that strike you as fair?
Absolutely not.
And why?
My heart is like beating out of my chest right now, even just thinking about it. And just like I said earlier, my reputation is everything to me. And
well, what about speech, right? Because I just heard Mr. Moore in his testimony say that actually when these technologies do like what we saw with Johnny Cash and Barbie Girl, or perhaps even with Taylor Swift and the deepfake explicit videos, that could be First Amendment protected speech.
yeah.
Do you think that your representatives in Congress ought to repose First Amendment speech rights on robots creating deep fakes and explicit videos?
It's absolutely not.
Robots should not be subject to free speech. I can't even believe I have to say that out loud. Mr. Mason, we've also talked about this transferability concept, and I want to push back a little bit at what I thought I heard Professor Rothman say. Like, why shouldn't a prominent person or any person have the right to sell their name, image, likeness? Like if tomorrow, I'm a prominent person, if tomorrow I wanted to sell my voice to a robot and let that robot say whatever in the world it wanted to say, and I wanted to take the money from that sale and go buy a sailboat and never turn on the internet again, why should I not have the right to do that?
I believe you should.
Right, and that's the bill you've supported creates this concept of ownership over your name, your image, your likeness, your voice. And maybe I'm just a country lawyer from North Florida, but the only way you own something is if you have the ability to enjoy the exclusive use of it and if you have the right to sell it. So if you can't sell your own voice, do you even really own it? And if you can't control the exclusive use of it, I don't know if you really own it. So I think this legislation is a good first step, and I think that the industry associations opposing it want to be able to avoid the liability, to be able to use the tech, and to be able to undermine the creative infrastructure that has allowed our country to flourish. I yield back.
There wasn't a question at the end, was there?
No. I asked my questions. I got the true answer.
You got a good answer. Mr. Liu.
Thank you, Chairman Issa and Ranking Member Johnson, for holding this field hearing, and thank you to the panelists who are here today, Ms. Wilson, Mr. Mason, Mr. Moore, and Ms. Rothman, for your testimony. As a recovering computer science major, I believe AI has benefited society and will continue to benefit society. It can also be misused and cause harm, and I think what we're trying to figure out is how do we allow AI to innovate but to mitigate their harms. And Mr. Mason, I'm going to ask you some questions because I want to know what the Recording Academy's position is on some of these issues. As you know, these large language generative AI models train themselves by scraping the entire internet to get data. Some of that includes copyrighted works of artists, such as, for example, Taylor Swift. Do you believe artists such as Taylor Swift should be compensated by these software companies when they use her material to train themselves?
Yes, we believe that people that have spent their whole lives, like Lainey, to create art that is being used and monetized should be compensated when it is being used. Yes.
Let's say a person who is a fan of Taylor Swift uses one of these models and generates lyrics in the style of Taylor Swift for his or her own personal enjoyment. Do you think that person has to pay anything to Taylor Swift? And do you think the software that generated that has to pay anything to Taylor Swift?
I think it would come down to use, what they used it for their personal enjoyment. Might be something to discuss, but as soon as they start monetizing that or trying to commercialize it, that's a different question, and they should be paid.
And I gather it's the same answer if the person was able to use a AI app that takes the lyrics in the style of Taylor Swift and then matches it up to a video that looks like Taylor Swift and audio that sounds like her. Same answer, right? It depends on what they use that for. If it's for their own personal enjoyment, maybe it's fair use, but if they try to sell it, it wouldn't be, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so Mr. Moore, I'm going to ask you sort of the same questions. Do you believe AI models that scrape copyrighted material to train themselves need to pay the people who own this copyrighted material?
Our position is that those are going to be fact-dependent. Oops, sorry. Our position is that those are fact-dependent inquiries that are going to be handled by fair use law. We don't take a position on either side.
If a person uses one of these software tools to generate content for their own enjoyment, do you have a position on whether that software tool or that person needs to pay anything to the copyright holder?
So, in dividing that, that's two separate. Those are two very different questions. One question involves the use of the tool itself and the output, right? And so, in that particular instance, that is another. I think that's another issue that's going to be litigated, because in that context, it's a lot like a Betamax. In other words, this is a technology that is capable of a lot of non-infringing uses. And so I'm not sure that liability would attach to the model itself. Again, that's something the courts are going to have to work out. With respect to the output, the question there becomes whether or not the output is substantially similar. And at that point, once the user makes that product more widely available, there would be exposure, there's potential exposure to copyright liability as well as to Lanham Act liability, for example, if they were passing it off as an original work.
Okay. What if the software company marketed their software as saying, hey, use us and we can generate for you lyrics in the style of Taylor Swift and make audio and video in the style of Taylor Swift? You think they would be liable if they did that?
Under existing law right now?
Yes.
I think you would have questions about endorsement. Styles are generally not, they're not protected by copyright. So there wouldn't be copyright liability for that. There could be, again, false endorsement liability.
And your association basically right now is just waiting for the courts to decide these issues. You don't really have a position on a number of those.
On the copyright issues, that's correct. We do not have a position.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Rothman, I'm just trying to understand your testimony, and you can answer. I'm going to have my time end. Are you saying that a artist can't contract to sell, for example, their ability to have a recording that's going to be used in a, let's say, a future movie, a song in a future movie? I'm just trying to understand what it means that you can't transfer this right. Maybe I'm not understanding what you're saying.
Yeah, that example is a license. So you're giving permission, you're authorizing the use in a specific context. That's in keeping with all of addressing all the concerns that are raised here. The person has approved a specific use, they've given permission, then the movie studio or the record label who has permission for that recording would be able to enforce any uses if someone, an unauthorized person, subsequently used that recording or capturing of the voice, even if it was manipulated by AI in the context of the sound recording or the movie. So that is completely legitimate, would allow someone to get income, but it wouldn't take away from that person those rights. And I don't think people are aware of how many contracts they sign actually give rights to their voice and likeness and name to others. And it's a big difference whether the federal government passes a law that enables that versus some state suggesting you can do that and then someone coming in and saying actually that violates the U.S. Constitution.
I got it. So you're supporting licensing versus transferring the right itself.
As long as the licensing is limited enough that it doesn't essentially become a transfer. So it needs to be specific enough so that the authorizing party, the identity holder, knows what they've agreed to, and the public can rely on that person's endorsement of the performance that they're going to see.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now go to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Thank you all for being here today. Mr. Rothman, you discussed in earlier hearings the need to balance publicity laws with federal law in October of 2023. Those were comments about the Copyright Office. Can you kind of expand on those comments? This is not the first time that technology has clashed with artistry, with creativeness. We heard a lot about it in Nashville last summer when we were there. The quote-unquote style of an artist has a lot to do with it. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so I didn't testify in the hearing then, but you're right. I submitted comments to the Copyright Office when they requested some guidance on right of publicity, identity rights, and copyright law. So there are a few different issues. So one, as you mentioned, a style that's come up here before, and we tend to say people can sing in a style like someone else, and you might hear a new vocalist and think, oh wow, that reminds me of this other person's voice. We allow that if they're paying homage. People, the Copyright Act allows cover songs to be made or sound-alike recordings. It's expressly allowed under the federal copyright law. So when people sue under state publicity laws, then sometimes there's a defense called a copyright preemption defense, which says actually federal law takes precedence here, and the Copyright Act expressly allows these copyrighted uses. There's mixed answers to that. Sometimes it preempts if it conflicts with expressed parts of copyright law. Sometimes it doesn't. And often state publicity laws will survive a defense that someone's using authorized copyrighted works when the person's name, likeness, voice, performance is reused in a different context, say in a commercial or marketing or in an action figure, maybe that a studio didn't get permission for, or in one instance, robots in a bar. And so in those instances, courts have been rejecting copyright, what's called a copyright preemption defense, and saying state publicity laws protect us in spite of federal copyright law. In other instances, copyright law will allow such uses. So there have been some instances that the record labels have litigated, for example, where a recording artist will record a song, and then someone will want to sample it in future work. Sometimes that's licensed, and some recording artists have sued and said, hey, I didn't agree to this use of my song in this new song, and the record labels have said, actually, we have the copyright and we authorized it, and courts have generally held that in those instances, copyright law, federal copyright law, preempts a state publicity claim because it's just a record label that owns a copyright reusing the copyrighted work.
Very good. Thank you. So, like I said, it's not the first time these technology has clashed. Cher had a huge hit in the 90s with auto-tune. Hank Williams and Hank Williams Jr. collaborated, even though Hank Williams Jr. had passed away many years ago, to sing a duet. And, the latest example, I think, is the Beatles' final release here as they use technology. So, Miss Wilson, I was going to ask you, can I call you Lainey? Miss Wilson sounds weird when we call you.
Call me Lainey.
Yeah. So, Lainey, have you been in a situation where you're recording either with your solo stuff or with other artists. And have you experienced this in the recording studio where they've used these technologies, or when they play back your own songs to you? Is there a way that they enhance or can work with you on those things?
I have actually been in a couple writing sessions where people are like, hey, check this out. And they show me exactly like what they could do to pitch me a song that sounds just like me.
It sounds like you. Yeah.
And
yeah.
it's just wild. So yeah, I've definitely seen it firsthand like that. But also even just with ads that I've seen on Facebook and everywhere else, it is literally my voice.
Right.
Selling pots and pans and weight loss gummies. And yeah, like I said earlier, it's really scary when like the people that are really close to you, even some of your family members, believe it.
Yeah. Have you ever used auto-tune in a recording session with
I
your
have
own
used
voice?
auto-tune.
She doesn't need auto-tune.
I don't need
Come
much
on.
of it.
She's never.
It depends on what day it is. It depends on what day, you know, whether I need it or not. Yeah.
Stop talking or you need an attorney, I'm sure. So, thank you very much. I
Thank
yield
you.
back.
Gentleman yields back. We now go to yet another gentleman from California and a classmate of mine from long ago, and someone who's been working on transparency in this area, Mr. Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. Thank you all for coming. I have the good fortune to represent Hollywood, Burbank, and surrounding communities, and a tremendous number of people in the creative industries. And I always tell my colleagues in Congress it's good for us to spend some time with celebrities because we get an understanding of what celebrity is, and it's not us. When people are trampling you to get the autograph of some actor in a B-level movie or a TV commercial, you get a sense of where you are in the pecking order. But one thing we do share in common with artists is none of us want to see our voice, our likeness used in a deceptive way. None of us want to see that being used to say things we never said, take positions we never held. Frankly, it's terrifying because like you in the creative industries, our reputation really matters. And so, Ms. Wilson or Lainey, I wanted to ask you, what's it like to hear some purported recording of yourself that you never made? What would it be like for an artist to hear a song they didn't write with a message they don't support, with a quality that is not up to their own standard, after you spent your whole life trying to create your brand?
I mean, it's detrimental. It's really, really difficult. You know, I try to make sure that everything I say on stage, every interview that I have, is thought out. You know, I know that it's going to stay around forever. I know people can pull it back up. And, I mean, there's been times where I have heard something and it sounded so much like me, I was like, did I say that? And it's just really, really scary to think that we're in a time that these kind of things can happen. And I just think there needs to be something done about it.
Well, let me ask our other witnesses that exact point. What should be done about it? Mr. Moore, the companies you represent, some of them are the behemoths in the technology industry. They have a role and a responsibility to take down content that is inauthentic, take down deep fakes. What are your companies doing to make sure that artists don't go through what Ms. Wilson earlier described as the gut punch of seeing their likeness, their voice, their image used in deceptive ways? And I'd like to ask Mr. Mason and Ms. Rothman if they could comment also on both what Mr. Moore says they're doing, but also what you think they should be doing that they're not.
So I think certainly with respect to copyright infringement, for example, many of our platform members have robust schemes to take down material that is infringes on those works, and they use technological means, which I'm sure many of my co-panelists are familiar with, to take them down. That's one part. Another thing they do is they have terms of service against particular kinds of content that they do try to enforce and to get those things down. As you know, and as you've probably seen, the practice of content moderation is a really complicated one and raises a bunch of issues. The Supreme Court is considering those now, and it considered them last year in the application of Section 230 in a bunch of different cases.
Well, Mr. Moore, let me turn to Mr. Mason on that point, the takedown. What is the experience of your members when they see their voice, their likeness being misused? Does the takedown system work? Do they actually take it down? How quickly do they take it down? How many million views, listens do they get before they're taken down? Is the system working? Is it broken?
In certain occasions it does work. It is very difficult. And a lot of people, I've heard it referred to as a game of whack-a-mole. You take something down here, it pops up over there, you try and take that down. It takes too long, it's too difficult. It's cumbersome for independent artists who don't have the support of major labels, and sometimes they don't have the infrastructure or the staffing that it takes to do all those takedowns. And even some of the larger labels are struggling to chase their own copyright protection.
And if I could ask you, Ms. Rothman, if the companies claim, the platforms claim they don't have the technological means to take them down quicker, is that true? Or is this sort of a willful design not to develop the technologies that really could address this?
I think one of the problems, and I agree with Mr. Mason, that it is a game of whack-a-mole, and so whatever legislation is passed, we're going to have the same problem because there already are laws that address this. So one of the problems is the CDA 230. Which I think has limited interest in technological innovation. So I don't want to comment what the companies can or cannot do technologically, but they probably could do more than they currently are. And just a firsthand experience, this is not just about celebrities. I've been impersonated online, and when I said I'm being impersonated, take it down, nothing happened. And when I said someone's using my copyrighted image, it came down immediately. So there is a disconnect. And it's, you know, as Mr. Mason said, their artists have more power than the average person. Regular teenagers, grown-ups, everyone are having their images, including in sexual poses, being circulated, and it's very difficult to get them down because the platforms use Section 230 to, and there, as I mentioned in my submission, there's a circuit split on whether state right of publicity claims are exempted from the 230 immunity from liability or included within it, and that has allowed some defenses in otherwise winning cases, and the platforms need to take some responsibility for taking down this material if we're going to have any effort under any laws, whether you pass new ones or just try to enforce the ones on the books.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Staying on that role of California members, Mr. Kiley.
Good morning, Professor Rothman. I found your testimony very interesting, and you testified that we do not allow people to sell themselves into slavery or servitude. We do not allow people to sell their votes or their organs or their babies, and for that same reason you say we should not allow people to sell their names, likeness, or voices. Now, I want to kind of interrogate that claim, not because I disagree with it. I think I actually agree with you on the question of transferability, but because I'm wondering if there might be another dimension to the harm that you've identified, in that I think that the reason that we don't allow people to sell, you know, their organs or their children or themselves is not just because of the potential for exploitation that's inherent in those transactions, but because it degrades the very idea of personhood. It blurs the line between a person and a product. It commodifies humanity. So I'm wondering, do you think that's an element of the harm you see in this transferability of name, image, and likeness?
Absolutely. And I've written an entire article where I, in part, also speak to that concern, that it does degrade personhood, it degrades us as a society, and it does commodify people in concerning ways. And there are lots of ways we can empower people to control their voices and likenesses, but allowing them to be transferable to others is not one of them. So I 100% agree. That's also part of it.
So I guess then my follow-up question would be, could this harm then also exist even if the right is not transferred, but it's just even if the artist themselves is using it. So, for example, you mentioned, if Taylor Swift had sold control over her identity at a young age, that'd be very bad if someone was out, just using that forever and she lost control of it. But let's say that Taylor Swift retained control of this and decided to create a very realistic animatronic version of herself to, let's say, perform in Tokyo, so the real Taylor doesn't risk missing the Super Bowl. Do you think the fans in Tokyo might feel a little ripped off that even if it was this algorithmic approximation was, indistinguishable from the real Taylor, that maybe something was lost in their experience?
Yeah, so I just want to be clear that I'm not saying people shouldn't be able to make money, but I do think that the fans in Tokyo might have some consumer protection claims, right? If they thought they were getting the real Taylor Swift and then they got the hologram. On the other hand, if Taylor Swift, and I don't think she would want to do this, I don't think it's great for her brand, but if she wanted to have holograms go on tour, as long as that was disclosed, she could be able to do that. My concern is that when an artist like her or anyone else can't actually approve that any longer, and so some third party is doing it, and when our concerns is also about just each of you being reanimated, saying words you didn't do, the prospect is quite chilling. And you can imagine some of your, I'm sure, student athletes, if you had signed away early on, or your parents had while you were children, because parents would have these rights, signed away your rights, then someone would be free to do that and people wouldn't know.
Yeah.
So I think disclosure is really important, and ongoing control by the underlying person is essential.
Thank you. And these questions that we're dealing with today are, of course, very important in their own right, given the importance of this industry, but it's also sort of offers a window into some more fundamental questions, given how, uniquely bound up in a person's individuality, the arts and entertainment and music are. And so I think it's, important that we start kind of grappling with those fundamental questions of how do we have a stable understanding of personhood in the law and just in terms of our general values in a world in which what have always been sort of uniquely human virtues are no longer the exclusive province of humanity. And you made a comment near the end of your testimony that I think there's a lot of wisdom in, and you said, as AI technology will continue to develop, and we should not lock in approaches that may swiftly become outdated. I'm pretty skeptical of our ability as policymakers to legislate specific solutions to specific problems that we're seeing with the state of the technology right now. I think even the high-level engineers at OpenAI can't tell you what this technology is going to look like a year from now. But perhaps what we can do is look to existing laws around the right of publicity and trademark and copyright and kind of understand their purpose, that it's not just to sort of create the right economic incentives, but it's to advance and value these uniquely human virtues. And so if we can kind of have that conversation, then maybe we can try to sort of anchor our approach to these questions in something that will at least provide us some stable point of reference against the sort of unpredictable advances and risks that we're going to see coming in the future. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We now recognize the gentlelady from Pennsylvania for her 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the ranking member and you both for convening this field hearing in this terrific, exciting, creative space. I'm Madeline Dean, and I'm happy to be one of the co-authors of the No AI Fakes, which I introduced alongside Ms. Salazar, who could not be here today. I want to tell you that I come at it from a number of perspectives, sure, as a legislator, but as a mom, as a grandmom, concerned with protecting children, concerned with protecting women from the abuses of deepfakes, children from the abuses of deepfakes. I also come at it as an author myself. One of my sons and I published a book telling a story about him, and my eldest son is a screenwriter and published author as well. So I'm looking at it, how do we balance the creative, the protections for creativity and one's likeness, to give a property right for voice and likeness, protect that, but also make sure that we also balance the equities and do it ethically. I was thinking and taking a look at some of the growing pains that we're going through. Unchecked photorealistic deepfakes risk public deception, as we've talked about, eroding people's faith in real evidence, facts, and reporting, critically important in this day and age. The very graphic and sexually exploitive deepfakes encompassing everything from revenge porn to child pornography, and we know that great percentage of these deepfakes tap into that gross and dark vein. And most pertinent today may be the possible inability of human creators to make a living. And to your point, Ms. Wilson, about you've honed your craft, you've spent a lot of time, you are deeply invested in it. And what you love about it is the ability to tell a story that says something about you, that reveals your humanity. And that's why we have to protect against AI-generated composition that steals our humanity. That's something I care an awful lot about. We were talking about the Taylor Swift. From the reading I saw, just one of these images was viewed 47 million times before it was removed. We can't even quantify the harm that something like that has. When we introduced this bill, it was not an attempt in any way to chill parody or satire. I love parody and satire. That is creation. That is revealing of our humanity. But I don't want lawmakers to turn a blind eye, to say that this is just too complicated and we're worried about transferability, we're worried about other things. I want to have conversations at how do we protect First Amendment rights, how do we protect artists, and how do we protect the public, frankly. Ms. Wilson, you were talking with Mr. Schiff about when you suffered deepfakes. When did you first learn of it? What did it feel like? And I'm very touched by your point that even those who know you best were confused.
Yes. It was this past summer. I think I might have been scrolling on Facebook, catching up with my folks back at home, and I see this ad. Said I had lost 70 pounds from these weight loss gummies. And first of all, it really hurt my feelings, if I'm being completely honest, because I did lose a little bit of weight, and it's probably because I played 180-something shows last year, you know? It had nothing to do with the gummies.
Not something you would recommend as a weight loss program.
But I kept having, like, people send it to me, and they're like, hey, you got to figure out how to get this down. I don't know what this is. And we would get it down, and then another one would pop up, and then we'd get it down. And it was just like we just could not keep up with it to the point to where I finally just kind of had to swallow that pill. And that's a terrible feeling, because I could not control. I wanted to tell these little kids, you know, like, hey, this is not real. I mean, I was having to tell people even in my crew. They were like, hey, I want to lose a little bit of weight. You know, tell me about this gummy stuff.
Oh, no.
I'm like...
I used to teach writing at a university, and the origin of the word plagiariste in French is kidnapper. So in some ways, some part of you was kidnapped.
Absolutely.
Mr. Mason, what are your hopes for the future of generative AI? What are your fears?
My hopes are that we can use it as a tool to amplify human creativity. My hopes around AI is that we can find some guidelines around it to allow creators who are always early adopters of technology to use it to benefit them and to bring more great creativity, more works of art to the fans and to the world. My fear is that it gets away from us and we don't have any guide rails, and that we're relying on sometimes hundreds of year old laws to protect us. Sometimes we're relying on laws that are in certain states but not holistic in a way that could protect us. My fears are that artists' careers will be damaged. My fears are that consumers will be misled, and in Ms. Wilson's case, damage artists to the point where they're upset. Their brand has been affected. My fear is that we as consumers and as people who love music get further away from the shared human experience that happens when we listen to music and when we create music and when music pulls us together.
Well, I share all of that. and I think the panel does. We are interested in finding out the right path forward. What are the right guardrails that protect the balance of interests? I yield back, but before I do that, Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to introduce for the record 2 articles. One is Taylor Swift and No AI Fraud Act, how Congress plans to fight back against AI deepfakes.
Without objection, so ordered.
And the second, just coming out today, I believe, Nicki Minaj, Cardi B, and more support No AI fraud bill in Congress, published on Billboard. And to your very point, in the image you used of a Johnny Cash fake, this lists more than 300 artists, including the estate of Johnny Cash and others, who support the bill.
Without objection, so ordered. Even though this is the Judiciary Committee, this will be heard and seen and talked about by all these members with other committees. So I might note that the Federal Trade Commission is supposed to protect many of these things and other agencies. And so even though we're looking at new legislation, we also are here to hear you out so that, in fact, we can begin pushing on the executive branch to assert powers they have, which, for example, somebody selling gummies and implying that. The fact is it's a deceptive practice, and hopefully in the days and weeks to come, we will see enforcement that might save you the "I'm tired of whack-a-mole," even though it was important for you to do. With that, we go to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Issa. Ms. Wilson, I see you have your hand up, so I'm just
Yes,
going to ask you why you have your hand up.
Because they tapped me on the back and they said it's time for me to go to Music Care's rehearsal right across the street. And I just want to say thank y'all so much for y'all's time, and this is awesome to be a part of. Thank you so much. I'm going to go to
Thank
rehearsal.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each one of the witnesses for your time and your testimony here today. I know it's very valuable. Proudly, I am one of the 5 original sponsors of the No AI Fraud Act, along with Ms. Dean. And I'm hopeful that exposure from this hearing in particular will help move this bill through committee. But I also recognize that these kind of hearings are very important to hear constructive feedback, to hear criticisms, to hear pushback, because we should never enter into new federal legislation lightly. In my opinion, I think we need to take it in a prudent fashion, and we need to consider all of the voices that are here today, and we need to fine-tune what we're trying to propose so that ultimately, if we pass something, which I hope we do, it will be beneficial to all, and it will be the appropriate language. We don't want anything under-inclusive. We certainly don't want anything overly broad at all. So with that, I specifically want to ask Ms. Rothman a bunch of questions today, because you've provided a lot of pushback, but Ms. Rothman, a lot of it's been very thoughtful, and I appreciate that. Let me just make sure we start from the same foundation on a few things. First, do you agree that individuals should have a property right in their voice and likeness?
Well, the property, I'm supportive of it being a property right as long as it's not transferable away. And sometimes people think of property as being sort of a simplistic thing that is automatically transferable, and it need not be. And that is another reason why I gave some examples of things we don't allow you to transfer, even if we understand them to be property. So I think it's appropriate to understand people as being able to own themselves. You can style it as a property right. Some states style state publicity laws as purely personal and say it's not property. There is a conflict in the law about that terminology, which is why I paused. If you're asking my personal opinion, I'm fine with it being classified as property as long as it's not transferable away.
Right. I know transferability is your big issue, but there are differences in state law. State to state deals with this right to publicity a little bit differently. So do you agree that there's room at the federal level for us to try to bring harmony to this issue?
Yes, I do think it is an opportunity. It's a very challenging task just because of the length of time these publicity laws have existed. And to the extent that they originated right in the late 1800s, early 1900s as part of the right of privacy that became the privacy rights that we more broadly understand, including constitutional privacy rights, those are actually the same across all the states.
And I'm going to have to just stop you because I got a lot to ask. So hold on. You mentioned in your testimony, your written testimony, you said absent jurisdictional hurdles, Tom Hanks, Drake, The Weeknd, each have straightforward lawsuits under state rights of publicity. So give us examples of those jurisdictional hurdles that you're referring to there.
Oh, so in the footnote in my written statement, I go into it. The only major jurisdictional hurdle is my understanding that Drake is Canadian, and so some state laws limit rights to those who are domiciled in the state, and since he's not a member of any state,
right? So we have some international issues. We have jurisdictional issues. We have state-to-state differences on how it's going to be enforced. In certain circumstances, an artist would have to go state by state by state effectively to enforce their rights. Isn't that true?
So Drake would likely have a federal claim already for trademark violation and unfair competition, plus, as Chairman Issa mentioned, the FTC.
In other instances, they would have to go state by state by state, and they would have different remedies. They'd have to go to different courts. They'd have different venues that they would have to pursue to have their rights protected. Correct?
I don't think that's true. That's not how litigation currently works. Even Ms. Wilson departed, but she may need new legal counsel. There's a lot of lawsuits she could be bringing and that she would be winning, right? We read all the time about celebrities whose images and names are used for false endorsement. We could go back again to the early 1900s. These are winning cases. People win them. They can publicize that they win them, and they're big penalties. And if you win in California, you get your damages. You don't have to then litigate in all the other states.
Yeah, but you also mentioned in your written testimony that the case law does not provide a stable or predictable roadmap for Congress to employ at the federal level. If it's not a stable or predictable roadmap for us at this point, state by state, then we need to create some kind of federal roadmap, in my opinion, to protect folks. Do you agree with the concept that artists have the right to all three, credit, consent, and compensation when their voice and their likeness is used in for commercial purposes or otherwise?
Yeah, so the quote, I think, was taken with regard to copyright preemption specifically rather than the prima facie laws. But I think you said that very quickly about credit, compensation, and consent before someone's name, voice, and likeness or performances are used. Absolutely, people should be consenting for those. Whether they want compensation or not may depend on context. And credit, as people in this room probably know, is something that is sometimes negotiated with a lot of vigor, particularly in movie and TV credits.
I know I'm out of time. Some of my time, by the way, was taken for the exit, but I will say that I have not mentioned Travis Kelce's girlfriend once during this testimony. But I want to encourage this. I want to encourage the continued dialogue, and if there are additional things that we need to look at to sharpen up the No AI Frauds Act, happy to do that. But I think that it's incredibly important for us to protect human creativity, both for the individual and moving forward. I do agree with Mr. Gates and a number of the other people on the panel that have said, look, there is a liberty in the right to contract out that, and if we need to somehow make sure that protects their personhood going forward, we can find a way to shape that. But we certainly have the right to say, hey, it's my name and likeness. Why can't I contract out or assign out the rights to that so that I can make money now or my family can make money in the future? Would like to work with you on that. Would yield back my time. Thank you.
What time? We now go to the gentlelady from Missouri, Ms. Bush.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member, for holding this hearing. And thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. I always start my hearings by saying St. Louis and I say that because I'm all about representation. And I stand here in solidarity with all the artists, the creators, the actors whose rights and livelihoods are at risk because of artificial intelligence and generative AI in particular. Shout out to all the St. Louis musicians and artists and their fans, I got to say that. Like any technology, generative AI is not only good and it's not only bad, as we've heard here today, but its effects on our society depend on how technology is developed, how it's used, and how it's regulated. Many artists use it as part of their creative process, as we know, from the post-recording production and mastering of audio tracks to special effects in movies to the creation of visual content and so much more. But we've also seen the horrific stories, which we've heard about and talked about much today, like the deep fake pornography. We've seen the fake endorsements of products, which we heard, and I'm sorry for what Ms. Wilson is going through. We've seen the artificially generated audio tracks, like the one that's been spoken about over and over today, like the collaboration between Drake and The Weeknd, the potential for the confusion, the manipulation, the appropriation, and exploitation is huge. And beyond that, though, I want to add something that we haven't talked about yet. We must address racial bias in AI technology. If I ask a certain generative AI technology to create a picture of a black woman, the image it creates will not look like me. The facial features and hair may be distorted. And there's a lot of other evidence of this bias. For example, Google disabled its AI program's ability to let people search for gorillas and monkeys in the Photos app because pictures of black people would come up. And these issues aren't limited to the creative industries. We see it in healthcare, we see it in employment, we see it in the criminal legal system and other areas of daily life. We also see evidence of other types of bias and discrimination, including based on sex and disability. The risk to black artists in particular must be considered in light of our country's history. During the 20th century, it's crazy to say that, but for decades, during the 20th century, black musicians who pioneered new styles of music like the blues were exploited by record companies and promoters who took advantage of intellectual property law. And when machine learning technology was developed in the 1960s, its inventors did not meaningfully account for race or sex or disability or other parts of human identity. Many of today's laws and algorithms are based on earlier versions, so when laws and technology do not treat black and brown people as fully human, is it surprising that the end products don't either? Is it surprising that black and brown artists face an even greater risk of their rights being violated? I know that these are issues that artists in my hometown of St. Louis and all around the country are concerned about. So as Congress considers how to regulate artificial intelligence, we must address all of these issues and protect all relevant rights. Yes, we should work together to ensure people's voice, their image, their likeness are protected. We should also work together to address the bias built into these systems. We should make sure that AI cannot be used to discriminate against people, and that companies, AI companies in particular, are required to be transparent, and that we don't simply trust companies whose primary goal is to profit. We shouldn't just trust them to self-regulate and do right by our artists, our creators, our actors, and our consumers, because consumers matter as well. So Mr. Mason, as the Recording Academy's first black CEO, can you share your thoughts on the importance of racial equity as a factor for Congress to consider as we debate whether to establish a federal right of publicity?
Thank you, Ms. Bush. You touched on so many really, really important points. I would just simply be repeating what you just said, but there is an inherent racial bias in AI. We know that. We've discovered that. It will affect black and brown artists disproportionately when it comes to music and art exploitation. So I thank you for what you said. It upsets me, and it concerns us absolutely. And with that, and I hate to interrupt the flow of the session, but being that it is Grammy Week and we have 10 more events coming up in the next couple of days, I have to please respectfully excuse myself if I may. So thank
Mr. Mason, if Mr. Ivy has 1 minute or less of questions, would you allow him to ask it?
Of course.
Please.
And I'm sorry.
The gentleman's recognized. No, I understand you've been very good to us.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Bush. Sorry.
And I apologize for impeding on your time, but I did have an enforceability question. Actually, a couple. So the training issue, using artists' voices in this instance to train AI to create And the discussion has been focused on making sure that the artists whose performances have been used for the training process get compensated for that. I guess I was wondering two things. One is enforceability of that, because if you use 1,000, say, artists to train the AI model, who's supposed to be tracking to make sure, we know which of those 1,000 get compensated? And then the next level for whatever it's going to be, training data 2.0, how do you even follow it then? Because not only will it use the 1,000, it might use others. So enforceability and tracking it would be one question. And then, should whatever law we're talking about putting in place still apply at the secondary level? And that's for you and Mr. Moore, I guess, or Professor Rothman as well, if you like. But you should answer first so you can run off.
Okay, thank you. It's a very difficult question, and it's a very difficult solution. We need to figure out how we can understand what is being used to train AI. And as you said, there could be 1,000 songs, and I think it pertains more to the songs, the copyrighted songs. When you ask AI to create a song in the likeness of a certain artist, it will go back and listen to records or songs from that artist to decide how to emulate them. There's got to be a way to do it, technically speaking, and I'm sure it's scary to say, but it might even involve AI, tracking AI, and what is it using. We have to be able to understand whose music, whose works are being utilized and scraped to create new works, and those people need to be compensated.
Mr. Moore?
I would say, again with the button.
Mr. Mason, thank you so much
Thank you, Mr. Mason.
for giving us so much of your time on the most important day of the most important event for intellectual property in the nation.
Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
And thank you to the clerk for pausing the time. I appreciate that.
We're fairness, if nothing else, here.
So a few things. I mean, one is that in my own mind anyway, this is why it's really important that these cases get thoroughly litigated. Because all of the kinds of facts that you are talking about right now are the subject of very, very aggressive discovery, would be my guess. In other words, exactly how are these machines trained? What was put into them? How are they used? How are these works used? And on the back end, what steps were taken to make sure that the works were substantially similar or not, right? So that if you ask an AI engine, hey, can you give me the the lyrics to Stairway to Heaven, it says no.
Well, as a recovering litigator, I'll say this: it could take years before all of that gets solved, and you might have, and you will have, I'm sure, conflicting decisions from different courts and jury trials. What should we be doing to try and fix it now instead of waiting for 5 or 10 years from now?
Well, right now, in terms of identity versus copyright, right? For copyright, from our point of view, is the courts are the institution that are best equipped to deal with these issues for now. With respect to the identity issues, I think...
Let me ask you then, how would the copyright law apply to the hypothetical I gave you, especially for training data 2.0? Is there applicability under current law for that?
So, oh boy. So I'm a recovering lawyer too, but it appears we're both having a relapse. Can you define for me one more time what training data 2.0, what you mean by training data 2.0?
Well, I guess there's the fair use question, right?
Right.
So you train, and I forget what he said, but let's say Motown hits. You want to generate Motown hits, so it takes 1,000, yes, I'm showing my age. You take 1,000 songs from Motown, and it trains it up, and then you can use that for the AI system to generate new material. Okay. And the argument, I think, is that that's a fair use issue, and that the performers, the original creators, should still be compensated. The question was, how do you track it? And then the second question is, even if we assume it's a fair use issue at level 1, is it still a fair use at 2.0?
So, in other words, at 2.0, you mean the output stage?
Yeah, because at the next,
okay,
well, no, actually, the next level, you'll train it You'll train one system,
Right.
and then it'll generate songs then. But then you'll have other systems that are doing the same thing, presumably. You could have another 1,000 of these new systems that then train the next level of the AI generation. That's the 2.0. So the 2.0 trained by, and I'm running out of time, but what do we do there? Under current law, because you're saying we should follow that.
That's a really good question, and I am going to take that one for the record, if you don't mind.
Mr. Chairman, I had to start right in with the questioning, but I do want to thank you and the ranking member for giving us a chance to have this hearing. The transferability issue, I'd love to chat with you about it because I want to understand the James Earl Jones scenario, but I guess we'll have to do that offline. But thank you so much, and thank you to the witnesses. I appreciate your insight.
Thank you. As we begin to close, I'm going to take a couple of quick liberties. I'm going to ask the ranking member to make a closing statement. I'm also going to note that Congressman Schiff has been working diligently and has draft legislation on transparency of ingestion. One of the greatest questions is, Mr. Ivey, you said, well, if you went for, by the way, Motown is current. Let's not pretend it's old. Okay. At least on my albums it is. It's eternal. But if you knew you ingested it for that purpose, it would be relatively transparent to begin with. But I think Mr. Schiff is looking at something that ingests most of the internet, something that ingests vast amounts of information, and how do you, in fact, find out after the fact when, and I'll yield to the gentleman for a minute to explain what he's working on, because I think it's critical.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're working on legislation that would require transparency for artists when their material is being ingested to essentially build these AI platforms and models so that it can be tracked, so that where intellectual property is protected, they have a right and a remedy and a recourse. But I think the key is making sure that there are systems tracking what is being used to inform these AI systems, and so that artists can be compensated when their works are used this way.
I thank the gentleman, and I think, Mr. Moore, that's going to go to your question of when you're building software, the systems that many of the people you represent, will they, in fact, be designing to be reportable? Will they be designing to be accountable and transparent? So that is, it's outside of the direct part of this hearing, but it's an important issue that this committee will be dealing with. And with that, I would recognize the ranking member, his closing comments.
Thank you. I want to once again thank the witnesses for their testimony. I also want to thank my friend and long-suffering colleague, Glenn Ivey. He always catches himself at the end of the dais, the last person to ask questions, but he always asks great questions. So thank you. And for the witnesses, I'm really intrigued with this issue of the contracting away of one's, or transferability as you call it, of one's likeness and voice, and how that can become as ubiquitous as arbitration clauses in consumer and employment agreements, and just in all consumer transactions. These clauses hidden in the bowels of an agreement, a use of terms agreement, or an agreement for personal services, embedded there, person doesn't read it, and next thing you know, boom, you've transferred your rights for a lifetime to use your voice and likeness. I'm really intrigued about that, and I'm intrigued, I didn't get a chance to ask you, Mr. Moore, about your statement that you support the adoption of a risk-based framework to regulate the technology. I wanted to hear more about that, but we shall reserve that discussion for another time. But I do want to thank the witnesses for your testimony. I want to thank the chair for hosting and calling this very important meeting, and also for insisting on the jurisdiction of this subcommittee to delve into this important issue when other committees in Congress are seeking to have primacy But this subcommittee and our full committee are fully vested, I think, with the need to deal in this area. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and with that I yield back.
Thank you. And for the two of you, on behalf of the four of you, I'm assuming you'll take questions for the record. Okay. As we wind this down, I'm going to simply point out a couple of areas that I think we will be talking about in the days and weeks to come, and they will be in many of the follow-up questions. And they're stories for a moment. One story is that when Priscilla Presley was one of the producers of basically a documentary about the life that she lived with the late Elvis Presley, the estate of Elvis Presley refused to allow any of his music to be used, even though she had a seat at the table. What makes that interesting is, of course, would Elvis have said no? Did he think about that? Or did he even think about his estate being transferred to whoever is in control of it rather than some decision he would make? And that will bring up the question for Professor Rothman of, don't we all ultimately transfer lock, stock, and barrel what we own to somebody? And that somebody, in the case of Casey Kasem, was not necessarily who Casey would have transferred. So my questions will undoubtedly be along that line. Additionally, I'll tell quickly the story that more than 20 years ago, I sat at the very far end of a large table at a foreign affairs dinner, and we couldn't hear what was going on with the Queen of Thailand at the other end. So I spent a lot of time listening to my table mate, and he complained about the inequity of not only the major studios and how he was treated on one of his follow-on pieces, but the fact that they were or could update his movie and change it. Well, he could not, in fact, go back and improve a failed movie. That man was Francis Ford Coppola, and he was talking about Godfather 3. I've never forgotten that, because ultimately there are individual rights, such as Lanny's rights, but then there are groups and large entities, which would bring the last one. One of my dearest friends, I'm proud to say, is Mike Love of the Beach Boys. Brian Wilson has not performed with the Beach Boys for longer than most people in this room have been alive. The fact is, the Beach Boys went on without one of their key individuals. And what is the Beach Boys? Who are the Beach Boys? What makes that group? There's a group entity, there's a likeness, there's a sound. That sound, does it belong to Mike Love? Well, if it's Kokomo, it belongs to Mike Love. On the other hand, if it's a host of other songs, it may belong to somebody else. And yet the performers, over time, began with brothers and cousins, and over time have become more brothers and cousins, just different ones. So many of my questions will be that. And I think for the professor, again, there will be a myriad of no one answer to that question of transferring rights and so on, but rather the necessity in many cases for a group, for example, to come together and say our group rights will be transferred at least between 4 or 40 or 400. I think of the major orchestras. Ultimately, no violinist has individual rights. So I've tried to give complexity in the close to an already detailed and complex subject. What I have heard today in closing is we have a lot of work to do. We must do no harm. But in fact, there is harm being done to people every day by the use of AI to their detriment. And in some cases, there are laws, but in many cases, the enforcement of those laws have to be streamlined for the benefit of all those who create the things that we enjoy and that make our life that much better. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days in which to submit additional written questions for the witnesses and additional material. And with that, we stand adjourned.
Thank you, brother.